I think it's fantastic that you're all gathered here this afternoon to brainstorm how you can drive forward the already very strong performance and the health of the screen sector in this area. I think it's fantastic that you're going to be coming up with ideas this afternoon pointing to the future. And my job really was merely to, I think, open the conversation probably. It is personal for me, Sarah, as you said in your introduction, because yes, I did propose investing in creative clusters back in 2017. And when I proposed it as the core, the report in 2017, it was the core proposal. The civil servants, when they were sort of working with me and drafting it, put it sort of down there somewhere. I said, no, this is the core proposal. This is the one thing politicians have got to see, clusters. And why? Because the creative sector, all the subsectors are naturally, organically arranged into clusters around the country. There are about 55 of them. And actually, if you're talking mini clusters, there are probably about another 700. It's quite clear that we needed to do far more investment in our regional economies. And it was quite clear that the creative industries offered one of those opportunities. And it was also clear to me that the creative industries is made up of lots of SMEs, much more so than other sectors. You know, that's why we don't always get the attention, because ministers can walk into a car park somewhere in the West Midlands if they're dealing with the automotive industry and they're dealing with about 4 companies and say, you know, today we created 2,000 jobs. You can't do that with the creative sector, where lots of SMEs, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking fashion or games or whatever it is, screen. And it was clear to me that a national government can't connect meaningfully with SMEs. This was an attempt to set up a structure where you would be getting people to pitch for money competitively, winning it on merit, and then knowing where the talent is locally, that you can work together in a consortium. And then the last point was they were designed to have a university partner in each cluster, because we absolutely see, and we still see, and we'll go on seeing in this country, the extraordinary power that higher education has, not just to convene, although today is an example of convening, but to stimulate the local economy, connect applied research into local businesses. Then, having got that off the ground, just about by the scruff of its neck in 2018, because we got it funded, as you say, via the Industrial Challenge Strategy Fund, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. Then there was this thing, a UKRI called UK Research and Investment, which I think everybody knows, Research and Innovation rather, which everybody knows what that organisation is, I think. Strength in Places. So UKRI, which, as you may know, came from a report by Paul Nurse, who said, we've got these 7 research councils and we've got Innovate UK. If we put them together, the state is investing about 8 to 10 billion a year in our future economy. It would be better if that money had a more strategic direction rather than those research councils all working completely autonomously. The research councils themselves did not like this proposal, as you might imagine, but anyway, they were grafted together. And I had the good fortune to sit on the UKRI board for its first 3 or 4 years, at a time when the creative industries were still not very seriously considered as an industrial sector. And I won't give a speech this afternoon about the 25 years since we defined a creative sector, where we've gradually, basically with our fingernails going up a cliff face, we've made improvements every year. But when I sit in a room like this and know the sort of things you're going to be discussing later, I know we're really making progress. So because I was on the UKRI board, I sat on the Strength in Places panel, and my ambition was that the Strength in Places, which was getting proposals from every conceivable sector. I mean, I remember one about using the water in coal mines in Scotland to store energy. So that gives you an idea of sort of how broad the proposals were. I very much hoped that the creative sector would get a couple of bids, but it had to be done on merit. And there were a couple of bids that were a bit below par, but the bid from Cardiff, from Media Cymru, really a very, very good bid. And before we even considered it on the Strength in Places panel, it's given out to lots of academics who score it. They can be quite antsy, but they scored it very highly even before I got to consider it. So it was a very strong bid. So I was delighted about that. And I know that, I think I'm right in saying 15% of the businesses in Cardiff are in the creative sector. Is that about right? 1-5? And I think Screen is the third largest employer here now. In no small part thanks to the investment, the sustained investment by the BBC, which goes back, well, I can't remember when they started doing drama here, but it must be more than 20 years ago now. And we all enjoyed seeing Doctor Who on Christmas Day, and we know where that was shot, so that's a great thing. I know that in your current and future plans, you have a strong accent on inclusion and sustainability, and you may be considering those two things later. And I applaud that. I think it's great. And those two things are in the sector vision we published in June, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute. But I'm going to concentrate more now on what I might call economic growth. I'll be really interested when you've finished your debates and your thinking and what comes out of your day-to-day as to how you can grow this. But the sector vision, which I think most of you maybe, I hope you're familiar with it, which we finally got published in June. It should have been published a year earlier, but well, I was going to say we didn't really have a government last year. That's not true. We had about 8 governments last year. But the sector vision sets as a target for the creative industries. And of course, Screen, as you said, it's not the only part of the creative industries, but Screen is about 21% of the creative industries. So it's a very, very important part of the creative sector. After software development, it's the biggest block of, in the terms of subsectors. But overall, the sector vision sets a target of creating 1 million jobs by 2030 and adding 50 billion of GVA to the sector and adding 50 billion of exports of products and services. Very, very big challenges, but they're based on the fact that that's, with the exception of COVID, where the industrial sector paused for breath, with the exception of COVID, that is based on the track record of growth we've had over the last 10, 15 years, where we've grown, depending on the year, sometimes 3 times faster than the economy, sometimes jobs at 5 times faster than the economy. And it's interesting, having said that, and you may have heard this statistic or you may not to go into numbers too much, but in 2019, from memory, I think the GVA, the contribution to the British economy of the creative industries was 115 billion. That's about, it was 6% of the British economy, 115 billion. Went down a bit in 2020. And in 2021, it was 108 billion. Okay, 108 billion. That's slightly off the peak of 2019. 2022, hot off the press, number we got in the last few weeks, 126 billion. So growth year on year between 21 and 22 of 14 billion. That shows you the growth potential of the sector and shows that it is back on its growth path. And that's why it's so important. Now, I know when I talk about the creative industries, I always say we should not be talking about it merely in terms of its economic value. That's very, very important, because if we don't develop economic value, we can't pay for the things we care about, like health and education. It's a simple formula, isn't it? But the thing about the creative industries is you get more than that. With the creative industries, you get cultural and social value. And personally, I've always put that slightly higher than the economic, which is why I say when you talk about innovation and sustainability, I respect the emphasis you're putting on that, because that is, if you like, a statement of the sort of society, the civil society you want to live in. But I do believe our sector contributes more to civil society than the creative industries do, than other sectors do. But what I want to focus on specifically today, and what is called a provocation, I don't know how provoking I'm being, but anyway, is R&D-led innovation, which is what you've thought about a lot and what you've been doing here, And what the investment in the clusters and strengthening places, the money was won on the basis that that's what you were interested in doing, R&D-led innovation. So I believe I'm right in saying that the cluster here delivered 120 R&D projects. And all of those will be 120 projects involving SMEs from this regional economy. What are your R&D-led innovation ambitions? And I don't mind how weird or wonderful your answers to that question is. I don't mind how ambitious and how sometimes, you know, the best ambitions, things that are realized in 10 years' time, sound a bit crazy now, don't they? But I don't think anybody should be embarrassed today from reaching for the skies and being really ambitious and saying things that others may go, oh, well, you know, dream on. Well, yes, dream on, be ambitious. So that's the first question I hope we're going to talk about. What are your R&D-led innovation ambitions? And the second question is, where might Media Cymru be in 2030? So how might it have developed? Will there be whole new elements to it that we hadn't thought of previously? Is there a particular acorn that you've identified that could be a massive oak in a few years' time? So if I may, just by way of background, just say a bit more about the Clusters programme, of which you were a very important part. You may know there were 9 successful bids for the creative clusters. And over the 5 years of the Creative Clusters programme, it had an extraordinary success, way beyond what I ever hoped, which was lovely. Because 56 million of public money went into the 9 creative clusters. And as I think some of you may know, and it's still developing this number, but the match to that from industry and from other sources has been something like 250, 260 million. So it's almost 5 times. And I hoped we might get a match 50-50. And it was 5 times. And doesn't that demonstrate the potential of our sector? That such an extraordinary, and you may have a specific number, and I don't know whether you do for the match here. And would it have been comparable?
Yeah.
Well, isn't...
It was significant here.
Yeah.
Great support from government and industry.
Yeah. And when a government minister said to me, well, how much of that came from industry and how much of it came from, you know, other sources, academic, other research institutes, and from other government sources, local government and so on, or national government, I said, well, it was George Freeman, actually, who was quite a helpful minister, the science minister. But I said to him, I don't mind. I said, it doesn't worry me. It does worry me if no money comes from industry. There should be matching money from industry. But if a lot of the money comes from elsewhere, that's money into our sector that isn't going into another sector. That's us growing as a sector, competing with other industrial sectors, which is what we have to do. So it was a really, really good thing. Across the 9 creative clusters, which, as you may know, were in screen here, of course, was an example. Fashion, games, and AI, those were the 4 subsectors of the creative sector. More than 2,000 SMEs were engaged. And there are lots of other statistics which are very impressive about the number of new products and services that were developed, the number of jobs that were developed, the number of training schemes, and so on. And Clusters 2, I hope, will be looking at other subsectors of the creative sector, like music, publishing, design, and advertising, all of which should be growing in terms of their R&D innovation in this digital century that we live in. R&D-led innovation, why am I focusing on that today? I've made quite a lot of speeches, I've written articles for newspapers, I've talked to civil servants, I've talked to ministers, saying we are an R&D-led innovation sector. We are as much an R&D-led innovation sector as life sciences, automotive, or aerospace are R&D-led innovation sectors, but we're not recognized as it necessarily. And the reason I picked those 3 other sectors, life sciences, automotive, and aerospace, is the nice punchline is that and you know it, we're worth more than those 3 put together. And that's worth remembering. That's the size we are, 126 billion. We're worth more than those 3 put together. And so we've got to get people to recognize our potential in terms of R&D innovation, the work that you're all doing and have been doing. So then I had another sort of scam or scheme or whatever, there's something called the Prime Minister's Science and Technology Committee. I must confess I'd never heard of it until about a year ago, but I thought we could weaponize this, could we not? So they agreed that they would do a little research project, which they did over the last 6 months, into the creative industries as an R&D-led innovation sector. And it's now published. So if you look up Prime Minister's Science and Technology Committee report into the creative industries, you'll find the report, because they've published it. Julia Black, who's head of the British Academy, and it comes from LSE, former colleague of mine, the UKRI board, led it. But I took them around all sorts of places. I don't know whether they visited here, but they may have done, but they visited some of the creative clusters. And I took them to places like the Royal College of Art, where I'm chair of council, where we have a joint programme with Imperial, where we do fantastic CreaTech schemes, and we've got 81 spin-out companies now from there. And all of the things that are going on that we don't talk about enough and aren't understood enough, and we need to get people to understand more. And they had 6 recommendations, and I'm just going to talk to you about 3 of them. One of the recommendations, that investment in the sector should reflect the size of the sector and the potential of the sector, which is what you're here, in a way, to discuss today. And another recommendation was that they should inquire into the availability of scale-up finance, which we all know is an issue. And thirdly, that we should get much better data on what slice of the cake we've got. So I am having my own little campaign at the moment. I'm saying we're 6% of the economy, but I think we're getting 1% of public research resource. Okay? Now, it doesn't automatically mean you should get 6% of public research and 6% of UKRI money and 6% of other research monies if you're 6% of the economy, because you've got to have the projects to invest in. But when I look around this room, I know that we have got the projects to invest in. So we can demonstrate that, and that was part of what the inquiry of the committee was, to demonstrate that we've got so much going on in our different subsectors. And you know, they looked at everything from 3D printing in fashion to music apps, to ad tech, to publishing, ed tech, and so on. All these different things that are happening in our different subsectors. And so they have undertaken, and this was in the autumn statement, so the Chancellor has already responded to this report in one respect. In his autumn statement in November, he undertook that the government would do the work into what percentage of research are we getting, so we can tie the numbers down specifically. And when that number is published, you should all weaponize it, because for 2 reasons it's not surprising we're constantly fighting this battle, as it were, to claw ourselves up the cliff face to be recognized like other sectors. One, because the sector was only identified 25 years ago, and we were the first, as you know, the first country in the world to do so. But you know, other sectors that get good funding have been around for much longer, are much better understood. The other reason is that we are not a single thing like life sciences. We are all these subsectors, so we're difficult to characterize, although I think we're doing well at beginning to get people to understand that. So that is where we've got to. What I'd like to see as we grow the sector up to 2030 is a massive additional infusion of both public and private investment in the great ideas we've got in our different subsectors. And there's great opportunities in fashion, there's great opportunities in music, in ad tech, in publishing, as well as screen. And I think we've got the people with the imagination, the ideas, and even the infrastructure of the SMEs and so on to do so.